Malik Johnson was hungry, broke, and carrying a dream nobody could see. One night in Chicago, he walked into a bakery with just enough money for a single loaf of bread. The manager looked at him and decided he didn't belong. The words cut deep. The room went quiet. And then Malik did something that shocked everyone. Hours later, he stood alone in a courtroom, painted as a criminal, while strangers argued over who he really was. The judge wasn't listening. The crowd was divided. It looked like his future was already over, until a frail, elderly woman slowly stood up from the back row and said one sentence that changed the entire room. What she revealed forced everyone to see that night differently, and exposed a truth no one was ready for. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Chicago, late autumn. A gray sky hung low over the south side, heavy with the promise of rain, but never quite delivering it. The wind slid through the streets like an uninvited guest, tugging at coats, rattling old signs, and carrying the distant sound of traffic and sirens. It was the kind of evening where the city felt tired, like it had seen too much and learned to look away. Malik Johnson walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not from shame, but from habit. At 25, Malik had learned early how to make himself smaller in public spaces. Malik was tall, about 6 feet, with a lean, almost fragile build that came from skipped meals rather than choice. His skin was a deep, warm brown, his face sharp with high cheekbones and thoughtful eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. He kept his hair short and neat, not out of fashion but practicality. There was a quiet intensity about him. Someone who listened more than he spoke. Someone used to observing before acting. He had grown up in a cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago, with peeling paint and a radiator that clanged like it was angry at the world. His mother, Angela Johnson, was a black woman in her late 40s, strong-backed and soft-spoken with tired eyes that still carried kindness. She worked night shifts at a nursing home, changing sheets, lifting patients, holding hands when families didn't show up. Malik rarely saw her awake when he was younger, but he saw what her work did to her body, and that was where his dream began. Malik wanted to be a doctor, not for money, not for status, but because he had watched pain up close and hated feeling useless. In his wallet, tucked behind a worn ID, Malik carried a faded photo of his mother, smiling in a borrowed church dress, and folded carefully in his backpack was a small notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes about CPR, wound compression, shock symptoms, and basic anatomy. Everything he knew, he had taught himself through library books, free online videos, and pamphlets from community clinics. That afternoon, Malik had walked nearly 5 miles to submit an application for a medical scholarship at a neighborhood community center. It was a long shot, and he knew it. But hope had a way of keeping his feet moving even when logic said stop. By early evening, his stomach twisted painfully. He hadn't eaten since morning. He stopped under a streetlight and counted his money. Coins, crumpled bills, exact change. Enough for one cheap loaf of bread. That was all he wanted, just something to quiet the hunger so he could get home and sleep. That's when he saw the bakery. Briar and Crust sat on a clean corner in a wealthier neighborhood, its windows glowing warmly against the gray dusk. Inside, golden light reflected off polished wood and glass cases filled with fresh bread and pastries. The smell, butter, sugar, cinnamon, hit Malik instantly, sharp and intoxicating. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he walked in. A small bell rang above the door. The bakery was quiet. A few customers stood near the counter, well-dressed, relaxed, unhurried. Malik felt the shift immediately. The way conversations dipped, the way eyes flicked toward him and then away. Behind the counter stood Derek Whitman. Derek was a white man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered with a thick neck and a chest that pushed against his black polo uniform. His hair was thinning slightly at the temples, his jaw square and set as if always bracing for conflict. Years of authority, real or imagined, had hardened his posture. Derek carried himself like someone used to being obeyed, and deeply uncomfortable when he wasn't. He glanced at Malik. Once, twice. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. "What do you want?" Derek asked, his voice flat. Malik stepped closer to the counter and placed his coins and bills down carefully, lining them up as if order itself might earn him respect. "I'd like a loaf of bread," Malik said calmly. "The cheapest one." Derek didn't even look at the money. "This isn't a shelter," he said. "You need to leave." Malik blinked. "I'm paying." Derek laughed. A short, humorless sound. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice, but not enough to be private. "Don't play games with me," Derek said. "I know your type." The words landed heavy. "I'm not asking for anything free," Malik replied, still steady, though his jaw tightened. "I just want bread." Derek slammed his palm on the counter, making a woman nearby flinch. He grabbed the tray of bread and yanked it back out of reach. "Even if we had extra," he snapped, "I wouldn't sell it to you. I don't want trouble in my store." A silence spread through the bakery. One man turned his back entirely. A woman tugged her child closer to her leg. No one spoke. Malik felt his throat burn, not from hunger, but from something worse. Humiliation. Derek stepped out from behind the counter, invading Malik's space. He was taller up close, louder, confident. "What are you going to do?" Derek sneered. "'Cause a scene? Want me to call the cops?" That was the moment. Not just this day, but every day before it rushed in. Teachers who assumed he wouldn't finish. Store clerks who followed him down aisles. Security guards who watched him longer than anyone else. Malik's hands clenched. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He threw one punch. It landed square on Derek's face. The sound was sharp, shocking, like a book slammed shut. Derek staggered backward, crashing into a shelf of trays. Bread hit the floor. Someone screamed. The bell above the door rang wildly as customers rushed out. The bakery erupted into chaos. Malik stood frozen for half a second, breath heavy, heart pounding. Not proud, not relieved, just empty. 10 minutes later, he was in handcuffs. Police lights painted the street red and blue. Malik didn't resist. He didn't argue. He stared at the sidewalk as cold metal closed around his wrists. As he was led away, he caught a glimpse of the bakery window. The bread was still there, untouched. Across the city, a few blocks away, an elderly white woman walked slowly along the sidewalk, fumbling in her coat pocket. Her name was Evelyn Whitman. Evelyn was in her late 70s, slender and slightly bent at the shoulders with silver hair pulled back neatly. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Eyes that had seen loss and survived it. She carried herself with quiet dignity, the kind earned through long years of endurance. She paused, her hand trembling as she searched for her medication. The wind picked up. Evelyn looked up at the darkening sky, unaware that somewhere nearby, a young man she had never met had just crossed a line that would one day save her life. The city kept moving, and none of them yet understood how their paths were about to collide. The Cook County Courthouse rose from the street like a slab of concrete judgment, its windows pale and indifferent under fluorescent light. Inside, the air felt stripped of warmth, polished down to rules and procedure. Shoes echoed too loudly, papers whispered. Even breathing sounded like a disturbance. Malik Johnson stood at the defense table alone. His shirt, once white, was creased and tired, the collar slightly bent where the cuffs had rubbed earlier that morning. Faint red marks circled his wrists, reminders of the metal that had been removed only minutes ago. Malik's posture was straight, not defiant, not broken, just steady. He had learned long ago that slouching invited assumptions. Standing tall invited challenge. Still, he stood tall. He did not have a lawyer, not because he didn't want one, but because he couldn't afford one. Behind him, the gallery was half full. The people seated there did not look at Malik the same way. A few leaned forward with quiet interest, their faces tense but sympathetic. They had heard stories about Briar and Crust before. They knew the way certain neighborhoods smiled politely while closing doors. These people didn't say anything, but their eyes stayed on Malik longer than necessary, as if willing him to be heard. Others sat stiff, arms crossed, lips thin. To them, Malik was simple, a violent man who lost control. Another statistic, another warning story. The room had already chosen sides. At the bench sat Judge Richard Halstead. He was a white man in his late 60s, heavy-set, with silver hair combed carefully back and deep lines etched around his mouth. His black robe hung from his shoulders like a curtain, hiding the man beneath the title. Judge Halstead was known for efficiency, not mercy. His voice was calm but distant, like someone who had learned to separate himself from the weight of consequences. To his right, the prosecutor read from a file, her voice clean and practiced. The charges were delivered without emotion. Assault, disorderly conduct, bodily harm. Malik listened without blinking. At the plaintiff's table sat Derek Whitman. His cheek was bandaged, the skin around it bruised in shades of purple and yellow. He wore a gray blazer over a pressed shirt, his posture rigid. Derek looked smaller here than he had in the bakery, less powerful, more exposed. Still, his jaw was tight, his eyes sharp. What hurt him most wasn't the punch. It was the risk of being seen as wrong. He glanced at Malik only once, quickly, like checking a mirror for a crack. "Defendant," Judge Halstead said, "you may speak." The room stilled. Malik drew in a slow breath. He did not rush. He knew how easily words could be twisted. "I admit that I struck Mr. Whitman," Malik said, his voice low but clear. "I won't deny that." A ripple moved through the room, but I asked the court to hear why. Judge Halstead did not respond. "I entered that store with money," Malik continued. "I asked to buy bread. I was refused, not because of my behavior, not because of lack of payment, but because of who I am. I was insulted. Publicly. Repeatedly." He paused. His hands trembled slightly, but he did not hide them. "When dignity is taken from someone over and over," he said, "something breaks. I am responsible for my action. But if the law only punishes the moment someone reacts and ignores the long chain that led there, then the law is teaching us that humiliation is acceptable." Murmurs spread through the gallery. Judge Halstead raised his gavel just enough to quiet them. "Your explanation does not change the facts," he said flatly. "You committed assault." Malik met the judge's eyes. "No," he replied, "but it explains why it keeps happening." At the edge of the gallery sat Sarah Klein, her notebook already half filled. Sarah was in her early 30s, tall and slim, with dark brown hair pulled into a loose knot at the base of her neck. She wore no makeup beyond habit, her face sharp and observant. There was a scar just above her left eyebrow, a thin white line from a bicycle accident years ago. She had been a journalist long enough to learn when a story was being misnamed. She had come for a headline, "Bakery Manager Assaulted by Customer." But as she listened, something familiar tightened in her chest. Sarah had grown up watching her father, a public defender, lose case after case because the truth didn't fit the narrative people wanted. She had learned early that justice often arrived late, if at all. That history had shaped her. She didn't trust easy explanations. Her pen moved quickly. At the plaintiff's table, Derek leaned forward. "He's acting," Derek said sharply. "That's what they do. He wants sympathy." Malik turned to him slowly. "You think I wanted to be here?" Malik asked. His voice did not rise. "I wanted bread." The room went quiet again. Judge Halstead frowned. "That will be enough," he said. This court does not deal in social commentary. Sarah's pen paused. Social commentary, she thought. That's what truth becomes when it's inconvenient. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file. The defendant's actions speak for themselves. At that moment, the courtroom door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped inside. Her name was Evelyn Whitman. She moved carefully, one hand gripping the back of a bench for balance. She wore a beige coat buttoned all the way up and sensible shoes worn smooth with age. Her silver hair was neatly pulled back, and her face, lined and pale, held a quiet alertness. This was a woman who had learned how to survive without asking permission. Derek turned. "Mom?" he whispered, startled. Evelyn froze mid-step. She had not expected to hear Malik's voice, but she had. "I just want to live like a human being." The words struck something deep and old inside her. Evelyn had spent most of her life being invisible. First as a working-class woman, then as a widow. Now, as an elderly body people passed on sidewalks without seeing. She knew what it felt like to be overlooked, dismissed, left behind. She looked at Malik. Then she looked at her son. The courtroom seemed to shrink. Judge Halstead noticed her hesitation. "Ma'am," he said impatiently, "if you are not involved in this case." Evelyn took another step forward. "I am," she said softly. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. Derek's face drained of color. Sarah's pen flew again. Evelyn stood still, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes locked on Malik, not with fear, but recognition, as if she had seen him before in a moment the rest of the world had missed. Judge Halstead frowned. "And who are you?" Evelyn swallowed. "My name is Evelyn Whitman." A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Malik did not yet understand what that meant, but he felt something shift. The courtroom, which had been so certain of its villain only minutes ago, suddenly felt unsure. And for the first time since he had walked in hungry the night before, Malik felt the smallest flicker of something else. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. Evelyn Whitman stood slowly, as if her bones needed permission from the room to move. The beige coat she wore had seen many winters. Its cuffs were frayed, its buttons mismatched, repaired with care rather than replaced. Faint bruises colored the thin skin on her hands, yellowing now, healing. When she rose, the courtroom shifted its attention toward her, drawn by the gravity of someone who did not stand often, and never without reason. Derek's chair scraped softly as he half turned. His voice came out smaller than he intended. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Evelyn did not look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Malik, steady and searching, as if she were trying to confirm something she had carried in her chest since that afternoon. "I know him," she said. The words were simple. They landed like a dropped plate. Judge Halstead leaned forward slightly, irritation flickering across his face. "Ma'am, identify yourself for the record." "My name is Evelyn Whitman," she replied, enunciating carefully. "And if the court allows, I want to tell you what happened on the day this young man was arrested." The room fell silent. Not the polite quiet of procedure, but the kind that presses against the ears. Evelyn drew in a breath, her shoulders lifting beneath the coat. When she spoke again, her voice carried the calm of someone recounting a memory she had already replayed many times. "That afternoon I left my apartment to go to the pharmacy," she said. "It was cold, windy. I remember thinking I should have brought gloves." She described the crosswalk, the timing of the light, the sound of tires accelerating instead of slowing. The car clipped her hip, hard enough to throw her sideways. She hit the pavement head first. The world went white, then dark. "It was a hit and run," Evelyn continued. "The driver didn't stop. Neither did anyone else." She paused, swallowing. The gallery remained still. I could hear footsteps, people talking, but no one knelt down. No one touched me. Her fingers tightened together. I was afraid to close my eyes. Then her gaze flicked back to Malik. And then he was there. Evelyn's description sharpened, her memory vivid. A young black man, thin, worn jacket, breathless as if he'd been running. He had knelt beside her without hesitation, placing one hand gently near her shoulder, another bracing her head. He told me his name was Malik, she said. He spoke softly like he didn't want to scare me. He checked my breathing. He told me not to move. He said help was coming, even before he called. She remembered his hands, steady, his eyes focused, alert, kind. She remembered the way he kept talking, anchoring her to the moment. "Look at me," he said. "Stay with me. Don't fall asleep." Evelyn's voice trembled, but she did not stop. He pressed a cloth against my head. He kept me conscious until the ambulance arrived. The paramedic told him he did everything right. Across the room, Derek's face drained of color. He stared at his mother, then at Malik, the pieces aligning in ways he did not want. Malik stood frozen. His mind raced back to the moment. The blood, the sirens, the fear in the woman's eyes. He had not known her name. He had not known who her son was. He had only known that she needed help. Sarah Klein lifted her head from her notebook. Her eyes were bright now, sharp with recognition. This wasn't an anecdote. It was a fracture line running straight through the case. Judge Halstead cleared his throat. "Do you have proof of this encounter, Mrs. Whitman?" Evelyn reached into her coat pocket with careful movements. She produced a hospital wristband, creased but intact, and a folded discharge paper. The document listed her condition, the time of admission, and a handwritten note at the bottom. First aid administered at scene by Malik Johnson. "I kept it," Evelyn said quietly, "because I wanted to remember the name of the man who didn't walk away." A murmur rolled through the gallery. Some faces softened. Others looked down. Judge Halstead studied the paper, his expression unchanged. "This does not negate the assault," he said. "The court acknowledges the character testimony, but the charge stands." Evelyn turned toward him fully now. Though her voice shook, it did not waver. "No," she said, "but it shows who he is. And it shows how my son treated him." Derek flinched at the word son. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The judge set the paper aside. The room held its breath, waiting for a ruling that did not yet come. And in that suspended moment, the story everyone thought they knew had cracked open, revealing something far more complicated beneath. The recess bell echoed down the courthouse hallway, thin and metallic, releasing people into motion. Doors opened, voices rose, shoes scuffed against polished floors. For a moment, the case paused in the narrow space between judgment and delay. Sarah Klein stepped into the corridor and leaned against the cool wall, phone already in her hand. Up close, Sarah looked more tired than she did in the courtroom. Her slim frame carried a tension she never quite shook, shoulders slightly forward as if bracing for resistance. She was tall, but never seemed to take up space. Years of chasing stories no one wanted to tell had taught her how to blend in, how to listen, how to wait. Her eyes, dark, sharp, restless, tracked everything. She was the kind of woman people underestimated until it was too late. She dialed her editor. "This isn't a street crime piece," Sarah said before the greeting finished. "It's bigger, pattern level." On the other end, a pause, then skepticism. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. She had heard it before. Always the same resistance. Stories like Malik's were uncomfortable. They didn't fit neatly into columns. "I'm going back to the bakery," she said. "I'll bring proof." She hung up and moved. The Briar and Crust Bakery looked different in daylight, less warm, more exposed. The glass still gleamed, but the charm felt manufactured now, like a set after the cameras left. Sarah pushed open the door, the same bell chiming overhead. A young woman stood behind the counter, early 20s, pale with nervous energy. Her name tag read, Lena. She was petite, with blonde hair pulled too tightly into a ponytail, eyes darting when Sarah introduced herself as a reporter. "I just have a few questions," Sarah said gently. "Off the record." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "I don't work nights anymore," Lena said quietly. "Not after what happened." Sarah asked about Derek, about customers. Lena lowered her voice. "It wasn't just that guy. It happened before. Different people, same. Look." Sarah listened. Next, Sarah stepped outside and sat on the curb, scrolling through online reviews. She filtered by keywords: time, race, service. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. Rude for no reason. Told they were out of bread while others were served. Felt watched. Humiliating. Sarah took screenshots. Dozens. Across the street, a small convenience store owner, a middle-aged Korean man named Mr. Park, thin and reserved, recognized the bakery name when Sarah asked. "I saw the accident," he said, pointing to a small security camera above his door. "The old woman, I keep footage." Inside his shop, surrounded by humming refrigerators and shelves of candy, Mr. Park replayed the clip. The image was grainy, but clear enough. A car speeding through the intersection, a woman falling, people passing, and then Malik. Sarah watched Malik kneel beside Evelyn, his movements quick but careful. She saw him flag down traffic. She saw him refuse to leave. "This matters," Sarah whispered. Mr. Park nodded. "Yes." Back at the courthouse, Malik sat alone in the holding room. The space smelled of disinfectant and old concrete. The bench was hard. The light flickered. Malik held a borrowed pen between his fingers, its plastic casing cracked. He wrote slowly, carefully, as if each word had weight. People do not need permission to deserve dignity. He stopped, looked at the sentence, underlined it. Malik leaned back, staring at the wall. His dream, medicine, school, the future he had imagined since childhood, felt impossibly far away. One conviction, one record, that was all it would take. He closed his eyes. Elsewhere, night fell. Derek Whitman sat at his kitchen table, the TV on but muted. His apartment was neat, almost sterile. Nothing out of place. He prided himself on control. His mother, Evelyn, lay resting in the bedroom, a soft brace around her neck. Derek stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. He had never questioned his authority before. He had never needed to. Now he replayed the moment in the bakery. His own voice, sharp and cruel. The way Malik's eyes had changed just before the punch. Derek opened a drawer and pulled out the store logbook. He flipped through pages of tidy handwriting until he found it. Denied service. Customer disruptive. That was all it said. Derek stared at the words. For the first time, they didn't look neutral. They looked like a lie dressed up as policy. On the TV, a muted news segment showed Malik's mugshot. Derek turned it off. Back in the holding room, Malik folded his paper and slipped it into his pocket. He stood as the guard opened the door. The story was moving now. Quietly and visibly, but it was moving. The next hearing drew a fuller room. Word had spread, not in headlines yet, but in whispers that moved faster than print. The benches filled with neighbors, advocates, a few off-duty workers still in uniform, and people who had come not to watch a trial, but to witness a decision. The air felt tighter than before, charged with expectation. Sarah Klein sat in the front row, posture straight, a thick folder resting on her knees. Up close, her composure masked a familiar churn. She had learned to stand still when pressure mounted. Years ago, Watching her father argue cases he knew he would lose had taught her that restraint was sometimes louder than outrage. Today, she wore a dark blazer with sleeves rolled once. Practical, ready. The folder was color-tabbed, cleanly indexed. She had brought the story with her. Beside Sarah sat Evelyn Whitman. She looked steadier than before, back straight, hands folded. Her eyes did not roam the room. They stayed forward. The bruises on her hands had faded to pale shadows. The woman who had once been carried by strangers now carried herself. This mattered to her, and it showed. At the defense table, Malik Johnson waited. He had slept little. The night had been a series of half-dreams where doors opened and closed without warning. Still, he stood with the same quiet discipline. He did not glance at the gallery. He did not scan faces for approval. He focused on breathing, slow and even, like he had practiced during long nights of study when panic threatened to scatter his thoughts. Derek Whitman arrived last. His steps were measured, almost careful. He wore a navy jacket that fit well, though it sat on him differently today, as if the confidence that once filled it had thinned. His cheek had healed enough to leave only a faint discoloration. His eyes, however, were tired. He took his seat without looking at Malik. Judge Halstead entered. The gavel fell. Procedure resumed. Sarah stood when invited. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and unadorned. She did not argue, she presented. She submitted community feedback, screenshots and printed statements from customers describing patterns of denial and humiliation. She offered brief confirmations from former employees, each one concise, careful, corroborated. She then requested permission to show video evidence obtained from a nearby storefront. The screen flickered on. The footage was not cinematic, it was raw and unflattering. A street corner, a car accelerating, a body struck and falling, people passing. Then Malik, running in from the edge of frame, dropping to his knees, hands moving with purpose. His voice did not carry on the recording, but his actions did. He shielded Evelyn's head. He flagged traffic. He stayed. The room watched. Derek watched. His throat tightened. He had replayed his memory of the bakery 100 times, always landing on the punch. Now he saw the other moment, the one that preceded it, the one that mattered more. The young man he had reduced to a problem had acted with care and skill when no one else did. The video ended. Sarah sat. Silence held. Derek rose. The movement was small but decisive. He stood straight, hands at his sides. He did not look to his lawyer first. He did not seek permission from the room. "Your Honor," he said, voice rough but clear, "I would like to withdraw my complaint." The reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath, a ripple of disbelief. Judge Halstead's gaze sharpened. "Be certain of your statement," the judge said. Derek turned, finally, toward Malik. He swallowed, then inclined his head. It was not dramatic. It was real. "I treated you badly," Derek said. "I humiliated you. I used my position to decide who deserved basic respect. I was wrong." He turned to face the gallery, forcing the words past the instinct to retreat. "I thought I had the right to deny service based on my judgment. I didn't. No one does." His voice wavered, steadied. "I'm sorry." Malik did not move. His eyes burned, but he kept them open. Relief and anger tangled together, indistinguishable. He did not know which he was allowed to feel. Evelyn stood. She placed a hand on her son's shoulder. This time she looked at him. Her touch was gentle, deliberate. "You said it," she told Derek quietly. "That's what matters." Judge Halstead lifted the gavel, then paused. The pause was telling. He surveyed the room, Sarah's folder, Evelyn's posture, Malik's stillness, Derek's bowed head. The machinery of certainty faltered. "If the complainant withdraws," the judge said, The court must still address the assault. He turned to Malik. "Do you wish to speak?" Malik stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. "I don't ask for mercy," he said. "I ask for fairness. I will answer for my action. But I ask the court and everyone here to remember that dignity should not be conditional. A loaf of bread should never be decided by skin." The word settled, not as a challenge, but as a line drawn cleanly across the room. The gavel came down, not in judgment, but in acknowledgment. The hearing adjourned with the sense that something irreversible had happened. Outside, the crowd dispersed slowly. Conversations overlapped. Some shook hands. Some wiped eyes they hadn't expected to fill. Malik stood by the steps for a moment, the city moving around him. Sarah approached, extending her hand. "I'm not done," she said simply. He nodded. He believed her. Derek exited with his mother. He walked more slowly now. He would have to live with what he had said. That, too, was a beginning. The ruling came without drama, but it carried weight. Malik Johnson would not go to prison. The court imposed a light sentence, community service hours and enrollment in an anger management program. It was accountability without erasure, a consequence that acknowledged harm without burying a future. When the gavel fell, the sound was softer than before, as if even the room understood the difference. Outside the courthouse, winter light cut through the clouds. Malik stepped onto the stone stairs and breathed for what felt like the first time in weeks. The city moved around him, buses sighing, people passing, but the noise no longer pressed against his chest. He had not been spared responsibility. He had been spared extinction. Sarah Klein did not celebrate. She worked. Within 48 hours, her investigation ran. The piece was careful, sourced, restrained, and devastating. It was not a story about a punch. It was a map, a record of polite refusals, coded language, selective enforcement. Sarah wrote with the discipline she had learned after her father's quiet defeats. Let the evidence speak, then step back. Screenshots, statements, timelines. The bakery was not named as a villain. The pattern was. Readers filled the comments with their own receipts. The conversation widened. It stayed grounded. Evelyn Whitman called Malik the following week. Her voice on the phone was steady, warm. She asked him to come by in the afternoon. Her apartment was small and orderly, the kind of place where every object had a story. Framed photos lined the hallway. A younger Evelyn smiling beside her late husband. Derek as a boy, gap-toothed and earnest. Sunlight pooled on the carpet. They sat at the kitchen table. Evelyn slid a thick envelope across the surface. "This isn't charity," she said before Malik could speak. Her eyes were firm, kind. "It's a referral, a preparatory medical scholarship. The hospital sponsors it. I've supported the program for years." Malik stared at the envelope. His hands trembled. "You saved my life," Evelyn continued. "I'm returning the favor the right way, by opening a door that should have been open already." He thanked her, voice low, careful. Gratitude pressed against something older. Pride, disbelief, relief, until he could only nod. Derek made his own changes. Briar and Crust closed for a week. Training followed. Not slogans, not posters, but practice. He stood before his staff and apologized publicly. He installed a small end-of-day shelf by the window. Pay what you can. It wasn't penance, it was policy. Some days the shelf emptied fast. Some days it didn't. Derek learned to leave it alone. Malik began his service hours at a neighborhood clinic. He scrubbed floors, restocked rooms, escorted patients. He listened. He learned names. In the evenings, he attended the program sessions, not because anger defined him, but because discipline did. He treated it like anatomy, something to understand, not deny. Months passed. On a bright morning, Malik stood in a hospital corridor wearing a white coat for the first time. It fit him better than he expected. His ID badge hung straight. He touched the photo of his mother in his wallet, a habit that had become a promise, and smiled just a little. He remembered the punch. He remembered the bread. He remembered the choice. Then a nurse called for help down the hall, and Malik moved, steady, focused, into the work he had always been meant to do. This time, no one could refuse him a future. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple, but it is not easy. In everyday life, we pass people who are hungry, tired, or quietly fighting battles we cannot see. Sometimes we judge in seconds what took them a lifetime to carry. Malik's story reminds us that dignity should never depend on skin color, status, or appearance. A single kind action can change a life, just as a single cruel moment can almost destroy one. In our daily routines, we all face a choice. We can look away, or we can stop. We can protect our comfort, or we can protect our humanity. Real courage is not always loud. Often, it is the quiet decision to do what is right when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach people who feel unseen. May God bless you, guide your steps, soften our hearts, and protect those who are struggling in silence. If you believe that God still works through compassion, justice, and second chances, comment Amen below.